This project started with the client supplying me with some photos and some measurements of a wall near the entrance to a boardroom. They wanted me to design a display that they could hang on the wall that incorporated photos of various commercial properties. They also wanted me to include the graphic element of their corporate logo. Inspiration for this piece came from me looking at photos of bismuth crystals on the internet. I was really struck by the regular patterns, the sort of stacked squares, those 90-degree shiny angles, and the colors as well. So keeping those in my mind, I thought that maybe I could construct something using cradled wooden panels and then mount photos to them. I decided to go with square panels of varying sizes. I also like to use found and reclaimed materials whenever possible, and I happen to have these boxes of shiny metal picture frames. I've had them for years and never knew what to do with them, but I thought maybe the 90-degree angles I could make with the frames would kind of echo the shapes I saw in those crystals. With that in mind, and many rough sketches later, I came up with this layout that incorporated 3 different sizes of wooden panels and several pieces of the shiny metal frames. I thought it kind of had an organic, cellular, crystalline look about it. Referring to the wall measurements supplied by the client, I then went on and made some scale drawings so that I could really get a sense of how big and maybe even how to construct this piece. I ended up using 20 by 20, 10 by 10, and 5 by 5 inch wooden panels. Then I selected which photos I was going to use, and I converted them all into black and white. And because the colors in their logo were blue and gold, I applied a gradient to the photos that was blue and gold, and the gradient goes in different directions and in different intensities across the pictures. And I thought that might kind of simulate the iridescent effect. Then I was able to put those pictures on my 3D model to figure out which pictures would go where. With their locations and sizes chosen, I was then able to send the pictures off to the printers. Meanwhile, those wood panels arrived, and I was able to go ahead and apply a coat of black stain and polyurethane to all the edges. Using a piece of reclaimed shiny metal, I was able to cut out the shapes for the logo, and then later I slightly rounded the edges with a hammer on a curved surface. The design called for some of the panels to have notches cut in the backs so that they could accommodate the metal frames which they'd be mounted on, and then I used glue and screws to mount them to the frame. To hold some of the frames to the front faces of the panels, I figured out that I could use a little nut and a screw and a washer and slide it into the little channel on the back of the frames. Then that could be threaded through a hole in the panel, and I could bolt them on. When my photos arrived, the first thing I did was trim them to the approximate size I needed, a little bigger. And then instead of using spray glue, which I used to use, I used this 3M product that comes on a roll. And you trim the sheet to the size you want. Then you use something to burnish it down. You could use a brayer or this little tool that came with the roll. You push it down really well all over the surface. You peel off this backing sheet and you now have a nice smooth layer of glue. I then applied my picture, burnished it down again to make it permanent. And then because the picture is just slightly bigger, I trim it all the way around. And then to cover those white edges that are showing, I used a Sharpie paint marker. I think this one's acrylic paint. And just went along the edges carefully to make them all nice and black on the edges. So that's one down, about 29 more to go. Where smaller panels had to be attached to the faces of larger panels, I use these fluted dowel pins. You just drill a hole and then maybe use some wood glue and it'll firmly hold them together. This is a little jig I made to help line up the holes on opposing faces. Here's a panel with some of the holes drilled in it. You can see here these will all be to accommodate some pins. And here's one with a frame attached to the surface. It also has dowel pin holes at the top. On the back here you can see the hardware, my little nut and bolt affair that's holding the frame on. Also there's some pins on the back of this frame as well. Here's a small one with dowel pins, and that's going to slip into the holes on the front of that one. So to help keep track of all the various pieces and how they fit together, I made this exploded drawing that kind of showed the individual sections and which ones were attached to which. This was also pretty handy when it came time to do the installation on the wall. To hold the larger panels to the wall, I made this wooden cleat that got attached to the wall with some toggle bolts, and then the panel slipped over the top, and then 2 pins went right through to hold it on the sides. This was probably overkill. Then I made a series of French cleats to hold most of the other pictures to the walls, all those medium-sized ones. A French cleat is just a piece of wood that's split on an angle down the middle, and then one half is attached to your picture and the other half is mounted on the wall. This little illustration gives you a better idea of how the French cleat works. The lower half, you can see here, is mounted to the wall with some screws in drywall plugs. You can see that sharp angle at the top of it. Then the picture just goes over the top and down, and because that wall section is a little shorter, you have room to move it left and right to make sure your piece is centered. So finally, it was installation day. We had some very detailed written instructions, and we were very carefully measuring to figure out where the holes were going to go for the cleats. I'm drilling holes here for the snap toggle bolts that held the larger pieces in place. It was really important to get the positions of these first wooden cleats just right, because everything sort of spreads out from there. So I was lucky to have the help of 2 much more experienced art hangers, especially at locations outside of the gallery. You'll notice as we're going here that we're putting pieces up on the wall and then taking them down, putting them up again, taking them down again. It's just because we're working out where the position of the next piece will be based on the previous one, and then we take them down so that we're not getting drywall dust all over them while we're drilling. In a way, this was like hanging a show, but all in a very condensed space. The medium-sized panels that were held up with French cleats, they were just affixed with regular drywall anchors and screws. So once we get the final cleat in place, the whole thing seems to go together very quickly. I think right about here is where we start mounting the pieces on the wall, and you'll see it sort of very suddenly spread across the wall. Then pieces that are mounted on the faces are wood glued with those little pins in place. And then the smallest ones that are just on the wall are just hung up with little sawtooth or bear claw hangers. And a mere 2.5 hours later, the whole thing was up. The prints were printed with a metallic finish. That combined with the metal frames really, I think, gave it that crystalline, almost metallic feeling I was going for. You'll just get a glimpse of the logo fashioned from metal there in the corner. So that's it. Thanks for watching.